All right, I think we're ready to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. It's officially afternoon for me, so there you go. All right. I'm going to see Guardians of the Galaxy 3 tonight. I saw it the other night. I loved it. I actually thought it was amazing. Which shouldn't be a surprise. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was amazing. It was a really good movie. Just all around fantastic. Giving people some time. I'm giving people another few minutes to get here into the stream in time. Can you believe Roger Ebert is the same critic who bashed some of Don Bluth's films being dark but praised Pixar films? I mean, I don't know. You have to understand it from his perspective. It's like, at the time, the only person that was making animated films was Disney. So when Don Bluth showed up and made these dark movies, people were like, what the hell is this? What's going on? People were kind of taken back by it. But with that being said, I've never taken Roger Ebert all that seriously, to be honest. Like, he's kind of, I don't know, I've read some of his reviews. Sometimes he makes sense, sometimes he doesn't. I think it comes with any critic, really. It's like sometimes you'll agree with a critic and be like, okay, yeah, I see where he's coming from. But other times, critics can have just really a dumb take sometimes. Like, all critics have dumb takes at one point. I'm sure I've had a dumb take once or twice here and there. Like, if anything, it's just kind of how it goes sometimes for critics in general. Everybody, just give it to everybody. I'm just giving people another minute or two to show up before we get started. Oh. Yeah, Disney was dark for sure. Old school Disney was very dark. No, Snow White was dark. Pinocchio was very dark. Um, Sleeping Beauty was dark. Yeah, it could get pretty dark at times. You have to forgive me. I honestly just kind of woke up like half an hour ago. I had to rush into the shower to get started because I looked like shit. So I went to go take a shower. I literally woke up like half an hour ago. I jumped into the shower to do all this, and now here we are. So forgive me. I'm still getting a little woke. I'm still trying to wake up. If that's what you're trying to. If I sound quiet and look a little groggy. Hunchback was dark. Well, yeah, we're talking about old school Disney though, like when Walt was still alive, like before the '80s at least. All right, I think we're about ready to get started. So, in the last video stream, which was last Sunday, we read from chapters 8 to 13, which was basically his basically him becoming an animator. Like this was him entering. This was basically his mission. He was basically starting off at Disney, and he worked on Sleeping Beauty with John Lansbury. But then he had his mission call. He went to Argentina for 2.5 years. He tried to get back in animation, but it was very, very difficult. So he ended up just kind of working a part-time there during the summer. But he had other stuff. If you just woke up, how come you didn't reschedule? Because I do what I say. I do what I say. I'm gonna read this book. I want to read the book. It's fine. It's fine. I'm waking up. It's all good. It's all good. All right, but now we're here at chapter 13. When we last left off... Sorry? Sorry about that. But yeah, it's like, when we last left off... Turn on a bit of light here. He decided he was going to try and come back to Disney full time, which is probably what we're about to see in the next minute or so. You know, he noticed that Disney is like, by this point in time, Walt Disney has passed away. John Wolfgang Ratherman is now in charge of Disney. So now he's going to come and work at Disney again. So let's go ahead and get started with chapter 13, Learning from the Best. When I called Andy Ingman's office in 1970, I wasn't aware of the big questions swirling through the studio. Who would take the reins of Disney? Les Clark? Mark Davis? Ollie Johnston? Milt Kahl? Ward Kimball? Eric Larson? John Lansbury? Wolfgang Ratherman? Frank Thomas? The 9 old men. These revered gentlemen who had been Disney's frontline captains of animation for more than 30 years were beginning to retire. Some were in poor health. Long-held secrets of animation would disappear when they were gone. Management was trying to look for talent, to fill the gap the best they could while the 9 old men were still there. On the phone, Ed Hansen, Andy's replacement, told me that Andy had retired, which hit me hard. Andy. See, that's Andy Ingman. I almost hung up, but Ed invited me to come to the studio to take an animation test, an intensive 6-week trial period to see if I had the right stuff. Later, I found out he recognized my name and skipped me right over the animator Bullpen's new training program run by Eric Larson. When I arrived at Disney, Ed ushered me into a room in B Wing that had everything I would need for the next 6 weeks. Animation desk and chair, animation paper, a variety of pencils, and an eraser. Animate anything you like, said Ed. Send your drawings to camera for a pencil test. We'll come back in 6 weeks to check it out. Good luck. I smiled as I picked up my pencil. Can you imagine a better way to train someone? I bent over my desk and vowed to draw like I was Rumpelstiltskin. Grumpy little Rumpelstiltskin of fairy tale fame knew the secret of spinning straw into gold. No one told him, he just knew how to do it. As sketches began to stack up around me, I muttered, "What you fellas don't know is that I have a secret weapon. I'm possibly the best, I mean the best in the entire world." I had been saying these words in the mirror for weeks, and the universe was already at work on it. 6 weeks later, holy cow, I passed the test and was classified as an animator, right into the big leagues. Johnny Bond and his unlit cigar led me to my new mentor, Frank Thomas. Here's a drawing he drew of him being tested by those guys, by Disney. Like that's him in his little desk and such. I believe the guy in the glasses here, that's Frank Thomas, maybe? I might be. It could be. I don't know. My knees shook when I met him. Frank was a legend. His history reached as far back as Snow White and included icons like the Wicked Stepmother and Cinderella, Peter Pan's Captain Hook, and more. Oh, the stories he told. During the time I worked with him, I gathered with other animators around his desk to hear tales of the golden age of animation and of Walt's reign as its monarch. He was like Homer. He was like Homer, telling tales of the ages. Telling tales for the ages. A shame that none of these stories were ever written down. When Frank told me I would be working on the upcoming feature Robin Hood, I was over the moon. The kid who couldn't animate a single frame of a bird flying was going to be animating Robin Hood. Maid Marian, Little John, and Prince John? But what really got my attention was my new office location, the Holy of Holies D Wing. D-Wing, I exulted to the man in the mirror that evening. He shook his head with despair. Right next to him. Him. The intimidating Milt Kahl. What a dreadful realization. For weeks in D-Wing, I found myself tiptoeing past Milt's closed door, praying that it would never open in my presence. One day it did. Don! I had no idea he even knew my name. Yes, Mr. Kahl. Now I can look relaxed under pressure, even cool. I've done it hundreds of times in my life, but this was not one of them. Carry on. Carry on, he said, and slammed the door closed. Facing John Lansbury again was ever on my mind. He had been moved to the second floor and was now a director on Robin Hood. When he finally called me to see him in his office about one of my scenes, I was jittery, hoping that Andy was happily married and that I had been forgiven for being such a jerk. John shook my hand with a warm smile and proclaimed, "Gosh, it's good to see you." My anxiety melted away. I hear you're working with Frank Thomas," he said. "That's terrific. You're in good hands." He fidgeted with some pencils at his desk, then looked up suddenly. "Don, can I ask you something? A personal favor?" "Of course, anything," I instantly replied. "Walt's gone, and Wooly has taken his place as the director. The other old men and me," I nodded politely, not sure where he was going. "The other old men and me, we're holding strong for now," John was saying, "but we won't be around forever. The studio needs some fresh blood. I'm hoping you'll be staying for a while." I felt a glow around me, as if I had been anointed. "I'm here for the long haul," I promised him, and I meant it. Yet all day his words rattled around in my head. We won't be around forever. Surely, I thought, the powers that be had a plan. I was yet in my naive stage, trusting that Disney knew what they were doing. Little things at the studio did keep bugging me, though. Creative animation meetings were going overtime as we grappled with demands to draw faster and do more with less. I noticed some guys in management, eyeing me as I walked through the halls and then checking their watches. The message was unmistakable. I was an employee of Disney, and as an employee, I had certain times during the Disney working day to take breaks. My impromptu walks were not during one of these times. This doesn't feel like the Disney I knew, I thought to myself. I even overheard a Disney executive, E. Card Walker, say to a group of trainees, "Disney is a well-oiled machine, guys, and nothing can stop it." That made me shudder. I believe that Walt had been sent to Earth with the incredible talents for a purpose. Under his watch, animation entertained and enlightened the world. To continue to do that, animation needed time. Could Disney really create art if it was cranking out a film every 2 years? I think I'm about to sneeze. Hang on. Yep. There it was. Okay, I thought a second one might be coming up. Whew. Madame Medusa rescues her mom from Milkall's ex-wife. I believe that. Alright. Lessons from Robin Hood. Although Wooly was short on tact, he got the job done. His style of directing was intimidating. He would gather 5 or 6 animators in his office to view the scenes through a Maviola's tiny screen. If the scene you animated was disappointing, he called you out in front of the entire group. You'd have to make corrections. Whenever an animator was summoned to Wooly's office on the 2nd floor, his woeful cry would be, "I'm going up! If I'm not back in an hour, call my wife. Tell her I'll be late for supper." I was thrilled when I heard that my first animation scene in Robin Hood was one showing Robin working his way... Sorry, let me read that again. I was thrilled when I heard that my first animation scene in Robin Hood was one showing Robin working his way around a ledge of a castle towards Prince John's bedroom. I spent hours flipping the pages up and down, checking and rechecking the movement. Then I finally sent my masterpiece to the camera operator to get filmed. Finally, it was ready for Wooly and the other animators to review. As he gazed at the screen, watching my scene unspooling through the Mavolia, he said nothing. Then he sorry, it's a big word here. Then he methodically, I don't know. Then he brought the film back up and ran the scene through again. Then he turned and looked at me for a long moment. The 5 veteran animators grinned. They knew what was coming. "Well," Wooly began, "I'm quite disappointed." I shrank to the size of a pea. "Yes, sir," I began, ready to tell him I'd redo the scene. But he wasn't done, not by a long shot. "I expected so much more from you," he continued. You've made the fox move all right, but he has no attitude. It's not entertaining. I want to see what the fox is thinking while he's sneaking around on the ledge. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. I'll have it for you by tomorrow, sir." Breathlessly, I ran to the men's room, leaned close to the mirror, and chose my words carefully. "I am the best animator in the entire world. My animation is the most entertaining of all. After all, the thanks system had worked on Don Christensen, so why wouldn't it work on Wooly? All that night I told on the Robin Hood scene. Entertaining. I managed to solve the problem, mainly thanks to the think system, but Wooly's comment got me wondering, what makes animation entertaining? The dreaded Milt Call gave me the best answer. I was animating a shot on the Sheriff of Nottingham, a heavyset wolf in the movie, running up the castle's spiral staircase. When I was called into Milt's office to look over my work with him, he said, "He's going up the stairs all right, but so what? It's boring, Don." Now Milt was a great animator. Some even say the best. But his speech was halting and slow, making it hard for me to follow his thought process. The best way I found to learn from Milt was to watch him draw. As the pencils flew across the paper and lines became fully fleshed out characters, it was as if I could hear him saying clear as a bell, "What if your Sheriff of Nottingham slipped on a banana peel, or bumped into a curved wall, or accidentally dropped his pants? Think of the Marx Brothers, Don. The character has to do something that the audience isn't expecting. Every shot you animate should have the element of surprise." Excuse me. Another lesson he taught me, again, by example. Spend some time thinking about your shot before you animate it, Don. Make a few notes before you pick up the pencil. Enter Gary Goldman. The special training program for new... Enter Gary Goldman. Oh, we're about to meet Gary. The special training program for newbie animators led by Eric Larson was filling up the bullpen. One day, as I was working at my desk, I heard a commotion out in the hallway. I glanced towards my open door just in time to see movers pushing a desk on a dolly to the east end of the hallway, followed by Johnny Bond and a new artist, his arms filled with a stack of official papers and a box of his personal effects. I wanted to meet the new guy coming in to roost in D-Wing and make him feel welcome. I followed the movers and found the new artist in my office. "My name's Don," I said, holding out my hand. "I'm Gary," he said, gripping mine while puffing on a cigarette. "Gary Goldman." Somehow, I knew we would become great friends. But the cigarette smoke had to go. It was as odious to me as stinky cow manure. I took a $1 bill from my pocket and placed it on his desk. "I'll tell you what, Gary. You give me your packet of cigarettes, and that $1 is yours. If you smoke another cigarette, I get my $1 back." "I'm okay with that," said Gary. "I've been wanting to break the habit anyway." We shook on it. We started talking about animation and have never really stopped. Every 2 or 3 weeks, the crew was invited into the theater to view the progress of Robin Hood. We were then asked by a moderator if we had any suggestions for improving it. I liked helping less experienced animators. There was so much I gleaned from years of watching the masters, but in these sessions, I was more interested in learning than spouting my point of view. However, something about Robin Hood's story did bother me, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. I asked Frank Thomas for his take on Robin Hood's story, and his answer was revealing. "I think we made a mistake," he admitted. Ustinov was entertaining as a comedian, and his French fop take on the character was so convincing that we just let him run with it. For those who don't know, Ustinov is the voice of the villain of the movie. What's his fucking name? I can't remember his name is. Prince John. That's what it is. Prince John, like the lion from Robin Hood. So yeah. By the time we needed a mean villain in the climax of the story, it was too late, he continued. When it's your turn to make a movie, be sure you don't make that mistake. Me, a director? Ridiculous. I just didn't see myself in that kind of stratosphere where Wooly and Milt resided, and I just wanted to animate. Even I knew that a director had to put a movie first and the animator's work second. You can't animate and direct. The problem with Robin Hood was something I worked out later during late-night sessions with Gary and other animators in my garage, while we worked on our own project, Banjo the Woodpile Cat. More about that later, though. My problem boils down to the conflict of good and evil. Walt understood that. The Queen in Snow White, the Hunters in Bambi, Stromboli and the Coachman in Pinocchio, Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians. In Walt's earlier pictures, there was always a strong villain. Yet in Robin Hood, the lion, Prince John, the only possible candidate for a bad guy, was portrayed as a clown. Peter Ustinov's reading of the lines was humorous. How could such a character even pose a threat to Robin Hood? The absence of evil weakens a movie. After all, without a threat, how can we show that good triumphs? In spite of all my nitpicking about the film, it was a rollicking bit of fun. I've even met some fans who claim it is their favorite Disney film, and Peter Ustinov's award-winning performance as Prince John is a milestone in animation comedy. Ultimately, congratulations must go to animator Ollie Johnson, who imagined that character into existence. Personally, I kind of see where he's coming from, but with that being said, I really do think Prince John was a good antagonist. I don't think every antagonist needs to be, like, super evil and rotten to their core, which we've seen before. Like, villains that are complex or funny, they can work just as well as villains who are evil and rotten to their core. You know, it really depends on the actual tone of the film itself, you know? And besides, I think Prince John was a decent threat to Robin Hood. There was that point in the archery tournament where he actually tricked Robin Hood and captured him and was about to kill him, and had to back off only because of some desperation from Little John. So, I don't know. I think he did a pretty good job being a threatening antagonist to Robin Hood, but that's just me. Wanted, the next director. One day, Wooly abruptly summoned me by phone. I went nervously up to his office on the second floor, expecting another embarrassing critique on my work. But there was no smirking artist around the Malviola, just Wooly behind his desk. The only seat in his office was a high wooden stool. There I sat, waiting for him to speak, as he sized me up from the other side of his desk. Finally, he leaned forward. "I've reviewed all the names in the training program," he began, trying to put my finger on who will take my place as the next director. My heart began pounding. I began to feel the pull of another crossroads. Please, Wooly, I thought to myself, don't say what I think you're going to say. Please don't say it. I'm not a director. I'm not interested, and I don't know how. The tip of his ever-present cigar flared. I'm an old fart, and may not be around much longer. Someone's got to direct the other artist. He leaned back in his chair. The young artist downstairs seemed to listen to you, Don. You're a good animator, and in time could be a great one. But yours is the name that I came up with. Oh, I was flattered. Who wouldn't be? Like a vision of a golden horse on a hill, my future as a Disney director glittered. It beckoned to me. But I'd spent the last 35 years learning how to animate. How could I give that up? Buying time, I asked. Do you really think I'd be good at it? We wouldn't be in my office having this conversation if I didn't, Wooly barked. He relented. Tell you what, I'm going to advance you to the position of directing animator for our next feature film, The Rescuers, while you get used to the idea. He waved his hand airily. Directing is quite simple. Show others what you know, teach them the art of entertainment. I somehow stammered out my thanks and a promise that I would think about it. We got up and shook hands. My hand was on the knob when he commanded, and another thing. I turned back. Sir? There's a dance scene between Maid Marian and Robin Hood that will be in the finale of the movie. Remember the dance sequence in Snow White, the one in the cottage with the dwarves? Check that scene out of the morgue. Copy that action. Turn Snow White into Maid Marian. Yes, sir. As I started to open the door, he growled, One last thing. Keep this discussion about the director between you and me. Don't talk about it with your peers. Not just yet. That might get you into trouble, he warned. Then his stern face softened. Maybe one night, you can come out to the house and have dinner with me and my wife. We could talk about it more there. This was not the Wooly that I was used to. Getting an invitation to have dinner at his house was like crossing a line. One that started a drumbeat in my heart as I made my way back down to the first floor. Snare drums playing the death march as an innocent victim is taken to the guillotine. Wooly might have just said it. A lot of people are going to hate you, and he knew all about that. No one liked him after he took over from Walt. No one. That night, I spoke to the reflection in the mirror. Don't be stupid, he said. How did Shakespeare put it? There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. On such a full sea we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves. Think of it like your call to the mission. Tell Wooly yes. I'm not ready, he whispered. Who is? He challenged. Hang on one second, I'm going to grab my drink. I left it over there. My water's right here. All right. The whole movie was recycled animation. Well, not the whole movie, but definitely sequences of it for sure. Alright. Getting thrown into the deep end. The next day, my assistant, Heidi Gundel, I think that's how it is. It's like a German name. And Heidi asked, "What was the meeting with Wooly about?" I blushed and answered, "Nothing, just a new scene assignment to animate the Maid Marian dance for the finale." "Say, do you know how to check scenes out of the Disney morgue? Because I sure don't." "Leave it to me," said Heidi. "What is it you need?" "I have seen Snow White many times. I knew that movie backwards and forwards. The dance sequence in the cottage, not the dwarf levels, just the girl." While I waited for the sequence to be delivered, I washed my hands carefully, brushed my hair, and straightened my tie. I was going on a date with one of the most beautiful women in the world, Snow White. By the time I finished getting spiffed off, a Disney employee pushed a trolley carrying a huge stack of drawings into the room. Animation drawings are carefully protected, stored in a stack between two pieces of chipboard, and bound by strong red rubber bands. The longer the scene lasts on a screen, the thicker the stack of drawings. This particular stack was so thick and heavy that only a trolley could handle it. After signing a delivery receipt, I closed my door and sat before the holy grail of animation. Reverently, I put on white cotton gloves, unfastened the rubber bands, and gently thumbed through the drawings. As the pages moved, Snow White began to spin, as beautifully and gracefully as I remembered when I was a child. I greeted her like an old dear friend she was, for hadn't she helped chart the course of my animation journey? Poring over the colors and lines, I humbly thanked the artist who had drawn the sequence, and Marge Champion, dancer extraordinaire, for her grace. She was the live-action model for Snow White. Or never mind, no, she was the Marge Belcher was the live action model. Marge Champion was a dancer. I guess she was just a choreographer for the dance. Marge Belcher was the live action model. That's my bad. At 14 years old, Marge Belcher, later known as Marge Champion, I don't fucking know what I'm talking about. They're the same person. Jesus Christ, Don, you're confusing me here. Who the fuck? I thought it was confusing me so much with the way she was like, he brought up a Marge Champion, then a Marge Belcher, saying at 14 years old, Marge Belcher is the live action model. Oh, she would later be known as Marge Champion. That's the same person! Just say Marge, God! She had been the inspiration for the film's animators, and now she would be the inspiration for my Maid Marian. What a strange twist of fate. Some of the 9 old men, particularly Milt, was not happy when they heard I was reusing animation for Snow White. "It's cheating," Milt grumbled. That stung coming from him. I kept my mouth shut and said nothing, because I was delivering to Wooly what he wanted. By the way, I had no regrets in cheating my way through the assignment. I gained great knowledge about human anatomy and movement. The training program was being touted by teaching animators, but as far as I was concerned, all they were learning was technique. I believe that wouldn't be enough for a director who had to follow in the 9 old men's footsteps. Wooly thought differently, though. He just threw you into the water to sink or to swim. Like the day he said, "Don, I'm giving you a director's assignment now." He ignored my look of terror. Take two actors and a camera crew, go out to the back lot, and shoot some live-action reference of Marianne and Robin. He wanted to show the two characters hand in hand in the forest, falling in love while strolling and dancing in the moonlight. "Make sure the film you shoot looks romantic," he commanded. "Oh, and by the way, you won't have a choreographer, so you'll have to create the action yourself. You'll then animate the scene." He held up a finger. "And very important, when you show it to me, I want to feel the emotion." I was fine developing animated scenes, but I felt woefully unprepared to direct the staging, pacing, and movements of live actors. He must have taken pity on me because he finished with, "You're the man for the job, Don. Now go get that gold." "Hello, Radjack. It's good to see you." I gulped down my nervousness. On our appointed day, I showed the two actors portraying Robin and Maid Marian their start and finish marks, and we rehearsed. Luckily, the actors were also dancers, a plus. Then the camera was locked down. The actors looked at me. I looked back at them. "Ahem," said the actors. "Oh, right," I said. Then, as if I'd been saying this my entire life, I shouted, "Roll camera, and action." Wooly smiled when he saw the dailies, and so did the 9. Even Milt nodded his approval. I walked on air for the next week. Sinking and swimming with the rescuers. As we wrapped up Robin Hood, there was talks of the next feature film, The Rescuers, based on books by Marjorie Sharp. The Rescuers is a story of Bernard and Bianca, members of the Rescue Aid Society, an organization of mice who rescue humans and animals. Together, Bernard and Bianca set out to save a kidnapped child. The only clue to the girl's existence is a note they found in a bottle floating in the sea. Can they find the kidnapper and save the girl before it's too late? Isn't that a fantastic setup for a story? My own drama behind the scenes was that Wooly was pushing for an answer on the director issue. I was just trying to figure out how to say no and still keep my career. Meanwhile, he kept throwing me into the deep end of the pool. He assigned me as directing animator for The Rescuers, challenging me with assignment after assignment. Here was just one. The Rescue Aid Society is an assembly of mice from all over the world, and so we needed costume designs for about 20 different countries, and thus 20 different mice. Dress them in the traditional garb of their own countries, Wooly commanded. Oh, and one more thing. Take a look at Pete Young's storyboards on a short project we're thinking of doing. The small one. You might be interested in directing that once we're wrapped on the Rescuers. Now, guiding the team and animating their rescuer scenes was a job I actually found quite easy. But the idea of directing an entire movie was a rabbit hole that I had no intention of falling into. How a movie unfolds on screen was a skill beyond my understanding, and no training program on Earth could prepare me. Wooly felt it was a done deal, but I'd toss and turn at night, coming up with all the ways I could politely decline Wooly's offer and still salvage my career as an animator. Script writing, storyboarding, casting, recording, editing, track reading, exposure sheets, sound effects, and music. I recited to the man in the mirror. And for the really meaty stuff, story beats, plot points, pacing, and themes. So what? He said. You didn't know anything about anything when we were on the mission together. A battle for the ages. Cruella de Vil versus Madame Medusa. There was another drama behind the scenes on The Rescuers, a competition between two of the 9 old men. For 101 Dalmatians, Cruella de Vil was animated by Mark Davis. Her goal was to kill the Dalmatian puppies, skin them, and then make a coat from their hides. Mark was heard to boast that, as a villainess, Cruella had no equal. Mark's animation on this horrible woman raised the bar, and there was no competition. "Oh," said Milcall, and this is how I imagine him responding it. "Is that what you think? Step aside, my good man. Let me show you how the big boys do it. I will animate an even meaner woman. One superior to yours, one that will put your Cruella out to pasture." "By all means," said Mark. "Go forth and conquer." Now, these two men were good friends, but Milt didn't plan on losing. It was a serious joust that would never go public, but the staff knew, and they were secretly taking bets. When the first scene of Medusa had come back from the film lab, a crowd gathered around Milt's Mavolia. Milt's crew had their fingers crossed, hoping for a win. As Stan Green, Milt's assistant, pushed on the pedal, the machine clackety-clanked, cranking the film through the gate. "Snoops, you don't have a way with children. You must gain their confidence, make them like you," purred the sensuous yet threatening voice of Geraldine Page as the mercurial, vain, bad-tempered Madame Medusa, the villainess of The Rescuers. Medusa's business partner Snoops, voiced by Joe Flynn, asked, "How you do that?" Medusa shouted, "You forced them to like you, idiot!" Oh boy, the crowd around the Mavolia cheered. Milt blushed and took bows. Maybe competition does bring out the best in us. When I saw Milt grin like a boy at her phrase, my fear of him vanished. In fact, as time went on, we became good friends. Every story has a hero and a villain. One of the things I learned in college is that every story has a hero and a villain, and the story is driven by the conflict between those two entities. Basically, it's the age-old conflict between good, God and Jesus, or the divinity you worship, and evil in the form of Satan and his minions. Cruella and Madame Medusa are as bad as they come, but these are movie characters, of course. With people, it's not so simple. Who is all good and all evil? Sometimes good people act in an evil way, and sometimes people you think are evil through and through aren't. Maybe we all take turns being heroes and villains, even in our own stories. The new CEO of the studio was Ron Miller, the husband of Walt's daughter, Diane Disney. Ron was a decent and fair man. He sat in Walt's office in Walt's chair, behind Walt's desk. Ron was impressive. He was tall and handsome and had an infectious smile. He and Diane had met in L.A. She was the daughter of a celebrity, and Ron was a star on the Rams football team. It was a prince and princess story if there ever was one. I was called into Ron's office one day to find out that Woolley had put my name on Ron's desk as his choice for the director after he left. Ron wanted us to get to know each other and air our views. Stunned, I sat down and tried to hide how unnerved I was. But I found him disarmingly eager to talk about the things that I thought were important. What was the future of animation? Who would decide on the stories to be produced? And what would these stories look like? This was only the first of many meetings. He knew that he had been handed a studio to oversee. A Stradivarius, if you will, that needed to be played. Maybe the question in the back of my mind was, did he have the skill and artistry to play it? My own doubts were stepping off stage. I was getting comfortable in the spotlight. Meanwhile, the newest trainees in the downstairs bullpen had their own ideas about the future of the studio. The bullpen housed talented kids who just brought in from CalArts, the Disney-sponsored institute that had installed the curriculum to train animators. These students had dreams of their own, and not necessarily in the tradition of hand-drawn animation. John Lasseter was already experimenting on their own time with computer animation. Brad Bird was pushing for more contemporary stories. John Lasseter was already experimenting on his own time with computer animation. Brad Bird was pushing for more contemporary stories. Love Brad Bird. While Tim Burton favored the darker tales colored with bits of horror. They were labeling the classical Disney style of drawing as old-fashioned. A young fellow in there with a strong personality, a guy named Bill Croyer, had ambitions to take charge as the director. They were already planning on what kind of films they would like to make while the old guard retired. At 36, I was viewed by the CalArts rebels in the bullpen as part of the old guard and a roadblock to their future plans. By the way, have you noted that all those guys who were so vehemently opposed to me also left Disney to form their own studios? I find that interesting. That is true, they all did. John Lasseter went on to do Pixar, Brad Bird went on to join Pixar, Tim Burton. What did he do? What did he go off to do? What did Tim Burton go off to do? I don't know what studio he went off to go work with. He kind of came back and did the live-action Alice in Wonderland movie. I don't know. Alright, anyway, moving on. Enter John Pomeroy. I never actually mentioned John Pomeroy in my videos, did I? He was kind of like the third guy. He was kind of like the third man with Don and Gary while making the movies like Secret of NIMH, American Tail, and stuff. When a handsome new artist appeared on the scene, the woman in B-Wing tried not to stare too long at his black curly hair and the dimple in the center of his chin. I was delighted to learn that John Pomeroy wasn't just an enthusiastic, talented artist, he also loved the Disney traditions and wanted to preserve the romance of the golden age of animation. His ability to handle a pencil was so astonishing, and he knew it, that I wondered if he had heard about the Think system. His sketches transcended mere graphic designs. They came from the heart. As soon as I saw his drawings, I knew that there was much that I could learn from this lad. We were destined to become friends. The next day, Gary Goldman and I were having lunch in the commissionary when John Pomeroy walked up with his tray and asked if he could join us. "Sure thing," said Gary, as he moved his seat and shifted his tray to one side to make room. "How are you liking the training program?" I asked John. "It's peachy keen," he replied. "I'm just glad to be here. I applied 6 times, you know. They just kept sending me away, saying I needed more experience." "Well, you know what they say," I said offhandedly. "Experience is the best teacher. From the mouth of babes and sucklings indeed." And here's the drawing of the three of them. You can tell it's like Gary, John, and Don, John, and Gary there. I believe Don is in the middle. John is the one with the... Gary might be the one with the mustache, since that was always his thing. And John is probably the one with the sword and hat. Oh, here we go. We're in the next chapter now. Chapter 14, The Turning Point. Walt never claimed to be an artist, but he surely was. His films showed it. He never compromised, yet daily I could feel the gears of the Disney machine clanking around me. The animator's just cog in its machines. To the average John and Jane Doe, a cartoon is just a cartoon, one being as good as another. The suits on the third floor seemed to share that point of view. To them, a good cartoon was one that put money in the bank. To me, it's more than that. With every stroke of my pencil, I was willing Walt's legacy and the Nine Old Men to stay alive long enough for us to breathe new life into animation. All we animators needed was an investment of time and money. I put on my big boy pants and went to the suits. We need time to skin our knees as we make mistakes, I complained. Creating art requires innovation and patience. But in the business world, that translates into an element of risk. In other words, not good. I kept being told, as long as the audiences are buying our films, just don't rock the boat. During the day, we employees had 2 15-minute breaks, one at 10 o'clock and another at 3 o'clock, along with a 1-hour lunch break. These became prime times for speculation and debate with others who saw animation as an art form. The studio commissionary was the perfect venue for such blather. John, Gary, and I, and a few others, raised on Snow White, Bambi, Pinocchio, and Fantasia, to name a few legendary movies, asked ourselves the big questions. What will happen to Disney and animation as a whole when the Nine Old Men are gone? Who is going to champion the art of the story? We were talented animators, but we didn't even really know how to put together a movie. The whole approach to replace the Nine Old Men is really only about teaching technique. I complained to Gary and John at lunch one day. The way I see it, when the nine are gone, the art of animation is gone. For example, do either of you even know how to even structure a movie to capture the audience's attention? I sure don't. They shook their heads. Maybe we could go have a chat with Eric Larson, offered Gary. I dismissed the idea. His hands are full with those CalArts kids. Then I had a eureka moment. Watching athletes at a track meet won't help you develop your own muscles for doing the high jump, the hurdles, or the pole vault. You learn by doing, not just talking. What if we made a half-hour short during the Moonlight hours? They looked at me as if I were nuts. Where would you get a Moviola and the necessary editing equipment? Asked Gary. Everything here at the studio was protected by the unions. We can't touch any of that. Oh, we can buy that stuff, I continued. We need to experiment. That's how we'll learn. And I've been reading a book by Donna Lee, the screenwriting instructor, I continued. It's great. We could study it, apply the author's advice, and see if it works. When they glanced at each other, I confessed, I know it sounds crazy. Oh no, said John. I was just wondering where we would set up. I have an empty garage, I said. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. Banjo the Woodpile Cat's collage in a garage. To make great movies, Gary Goldman, John Pomeroy, and I needed to know what questions to ask. Then we needed time to answer those questions. Asking and answering, trial and error. The excitement of making discoveries was like a rocket taking us to Mars. First, Gary, John, and I began meeting on Saturdays and set up a small studio in my tiny garage. We bought a Moviola, an editing bench, and a very old 35mm projector, practically an antique. Either too fast or too slow. That old contraption had forgotten how many frames to show per second. See, and whenever I kicked it in frustration, the pull-down claw would eat the film. Finally, I began thinking of it as a great anti-projector and threw a black drape over the heap of junk and called the Museum of Cinematic History to come take it away. And good riddance. You may recall my mention of a tiny kitten that lived in a wood pile just outside the milking barn in Payson, Utah. This was like way back weeks ago. We read that. He was the poor little feline runt. He had no future. He had no future. I've always wondered what happened to him, and so my concern of the little guy led to scripting a story. We imagined that he ran away from home, got lost in the big city, and couldn't find his way back. Of course, it would have a happy ending. Using Donna Lee's screenwriting book, we asked the big questions. How should a story unfold? Who was the hero, and what does he or she want? Who was the villain, and what does he or she want? Who would be the clown, the character to supply comic relief? What was the theme of the story? Oh my god, I can't talk today. Was the theme of the story riveting? Would the audience care about the outcome? We studied the rules that should be followed to capture the attention of the viewing audience. For example, The main character must be likable, but have at least one flaw that needs overcoming. The flaw could even be the solution to the conflict. Lots of Walt's best movies showed this, like Dumbo, for example. The little elephant's ears are an object of ridicule, but they are also the solution to Dumbo's problems, and they will eventually make him famous. Another rule: the villain has to appear invincible, but must also have a flaw, a reason that he or she can be defeated. For example, the Queen Snow White is beautiful, but she is also vain and jealous, which eventually leads to her destruction. Oh my goodness, we were like excited kids again. Armed with insights, we went to our day jobs at the studio with renewed enthusiasm. We viewed the rescuers with an eye focused on the story, not merely the quality of the animation. Honestly, we must have been insufferable. I suspect it was the curse of youth. Always criticizing, always finding fault, always thinking you have all the answers. Our dog-eared books about screenwriting were a good reminder that we were amateurs. It made us better appreciate the wisdom of the 9 old men. After working with Walt for 40 years, they were very well aware on how to construct a movie. We, on the other hand, were not. We had a long way to go just to catch up, and we were running as fast as we could. But back to Banjo, the 26-minute little short that took 4 years to finish and changed everything. Every weekend, there were new challenges in designing characters, making storyboards, shooting the boards and editing, adding sound effects to the film, and temporary music. And then, the expenditures, like recording the voice talent and hiring a composer to score the picture. To pay for all of this, I ended up taking a second mortgage on my house, and that's when the man in the mirror waved his finger in my face. "You've lost your mind," he said. "You're respected at Disney. Learn at the feet of the 9 old men. You don't have to rediscover the wheel in your garage." "You've always been on my case about reading. Well, guess what? I'm reading and writing. How do you like them apples?" "I don't like these apples. They're rotten." Cliffhanger ahead. During one of our weekend discussions, Gary reads aloud Donna Lee's book. A movie story is told in 3 acts, with a plot point at the end of Act 1 and another at the end of Act 2. What the Sam Hill is a plot point, I asked. John spoke up. It's like a cliffhanger, and the moment in the story where something happens that moves the story in a different direction. He gave us an illustration from Walt. Cinderella, upon hearing about the royal ball, dreams of attending it. Her little friends, the mice, make her a gown to wear, but when Cinderella's 2 stepsisters rip up the dress, the direction of her dreams changes. The curtain comes down on Act 1 at that cliffhanger. Then Act 2 begins with the appearance of the fairy godmother with a magical wand. She gives Cinderella another dress, and with it, the gift of an enchanted evening at the ball, dancing with the prince. "And where does Act 2 end?" asked Gary. "Well, let me guess that one," I said. "The clock strikes 12, the girl escapes in rags, and the prince stands on the steps of the palace holding one of her glass slippers, vowing he will marry only the girl upon whose foot the slipper will fit." Any one of them, it doesn't matter if it's actually the girl, you know. With that sentence, the curtain comes down on Act 2. The 3rd act begins with a search. We learned 3 more terms: the black moment, the resolution to the black moment, and the happy ending. I quizzed Gary. "Okay, what's the black moment in Cinderella's story?" "I'll take a shot at it," he said. "The evil stepmother suspects that Cinderella might be the mysterious girl at the ball and locks her up in the tower room. When the prince and the entourage arrive at the slipper, Cinderella is unavailable. Together, the mice and Bruno, the dog... Hey, how come we don't talk about that? The fact that the dog's name is Bruno, how come we don't talk about that?" "Resolve the black moment," interrupted John. "The mice steal the key from the stepmother's dress pocket. Bruno chases Lucifer the cat. Cinderella gets the key, rushes down the stairs in the nick of time, and tries on the slipper. She and the prince marry, and they live happily ever after." Could the 3 of us come up with a storyline about the likable cat, including 2 plot points and a black moment? We follow the instructions in the screenwriting book to the letter. We brainstormed ideas, writing them on 4x5 cards, and pinning them up on a board. How easy. "Just follow the book," we said. We were like a ship of fools, crashing on the rocks at every turn. Writing is rewriting. Any writer worth his salt knows that. The words that sounded good on the written page one day went south on the next. Banjo could never have been made at Disney. It never made us any money, but then it wasn't meant to. It was meant to teach. and it did that very well. Growing a thick skin. Animators are a breed apart, but don't listen to me, listen to Steven Spielberg. When I met Steven, he told of his first experience with the animation world. He had an idea that it would be great fun to invite all the animation heroes who were still living to a story meeting on the Amblin lot in Universal. This was when he was working up ideas for his first animated feature, which would become An American Tail. The invitations went out, and the audacious day arrived. The men and women gathered, but Steven said it was like pulling teeth to get them to even speak to each other. Steven grinned as he delivered the punchline to his story. I thought we had troubles in the live-action world, but you guys take the prize. The egos in the live-action camp pale beside the ones in animation. I won't be doing that again. Wooly had elevated me to a directional role where I was in competition with the CalArts kids and other artists at Disney. He warned me, being a director will never make you popular. Those people you lead will be jealous of your position, and they'll say mean things and spread ugly rumors. I've heard them all. Ignore them. Develop a thick skin. I was trying. My life on the farm hadn't prepared me for the dog-eat-dog mentality of the animation world. If you plant corn, you get corn. If you plant sugar beets, you get sugar beets. The only thing to worry about was the hot sun or the winter frost. It never occurred to me that some people could hold grudges and act upon them. As long as you're the underdog, they root for you. But once you're no longer the underdog, they say, how come you? Why not me? Well, that's very relatable, actually. I didn't want to fight those CalArts kids in the bullpen on the first floor. Eager to make their mark in life, I didn't want to fight anybody. Each night, the reflection urged me, just keep your head down and your mouth shut. You're still the best animator in the world. The only way forward, I figured, was to keep in touch with the man upstairs and obey the commandments. Some people might count to 10 to keep their tool. I chanted, however, love thy Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Upon these 2 commandments hang all the rest. Be patient and kind. Remain long-suffering and slow to anger. Forgive, have faith and hope, practice charity. Don't just talk the talk, Dawn, I urged myself. Walk it. Through my own struggles, I saw my parents with wiser eyes. Even when my dad failed to be patient, he knew how important it was to try. Even when our family could barely make ends meet. Mom never lost hope. The end with the small one. Meanwhile, back at Disney Studios, Pete Young and Vance Gary had finished the boards on the short, The Small One. Eric Larson was scheduled to direct the short. However, as he was already heading up the training program with the students from CalArts, Ron Miller pulled it away from him and assigned it to me. I got chills, and not from excitement. First, I imagine Eric wasn't too happy about this decision. Second, was I up to snuff as a director? I was learning as fast as I could on the weekends, but the stakes were high. Not only would the nine be watching me, but the CalArts bullpen would be as well. I could practically feel Wooly's breath on my neck as I worked. It helped me to see it as a ball game that I had to win. The 9th inning, the bases loaded, and me up at bat. I needed a home run. The story came from a 1947's children's book from Charles Tazewell. It was a serious piece about a boy living outside of Nazareth who must part with his best friend, an old donkey. No one at the market is interested in buying the old donkey except for the tanner. Then the donkey's life is spared when a man named Joseph buys him from the boy for 1 piece of silver. This donkey becomes the legendary beast that Mary rides into the town of Bethlehem, and to the stable where the Christ child is born. Lots of heart, but very little comedy. I tasked myself with minding the entertainment in this charming little story. I decided after several fruitless hours that it would be like animating the Lord's Prayer. Strike 1. Next, I thought of propping it up with some wonderful songs. Sorry to disappoint you, Don, said Wooly. There's not enough money in the budget for songs. Short subjects don't make money, even if they are Christmas specials. Strike 2. Experienced talent could get me through this. Well, who can I count on for animators, I asked. Oh, that, continued Wooly. Your crew will be trainees. We want to see what you guys can do on your own. Strike 3. Damn the torpedoes, I said. I took a stab at the title song's music and lyrics and one other number, the Merchant Song. Bob Brunner, a brilliant young composer in the music department, was assigned to arrange and conduct the orchestra. I took my leadership duties seriously. As the animation director, I was supposed to hold the vision of the entire film, lay out scenes, and oversee how trainees' drawings came to life. I worked hard at it and was proud of their efforts. Fair warning, you might want to skip over the next part. My journey with the small one does not have a happy ending. Sitting in the screening room with Wooly and a few of the old guard, we viewed the finished work beginning to end. The lights went up. Wooly remained silent for about 30 seconds, an eternity. He then looked at me, and I heard the words he had said to me 6 years ago on Robin Hood. They pierced me, much more painful now than they were back then. I'm quite disappointed. I expected much more from you. Your film is not very entertaining. If it's slightly better than Hanna-Barbera, that's only because you in-betweened it. Damn, gotta fucking bring down Hanna-Barbera like that. Shit. Why did his words hurt so much? Because he was right. News of my failure to produce a Disney-quality product spread like wildfire throughout the studio. As quickly as my career as a director began, it looked like it was over. But instead of anger, or disappointment, or resentment, I felt a sense of relief. This meant that I could now go back to doing what I loved. Animation. Wooly, however, had other plans for me. Getting the hang of it with Pete's Dragon. With so many of the 9 old men, namely Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, John Lansbury, Milt Kahl, and Mark Davis, heavily involved in the upcoming feature The Fox and the Hound, I was surprised Wooly plucked me out of the animation ranks to direct. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. To direct again. He sent me to the back lot to direct some live-action study for the widow Tweed, the lonely old woman in the story who cared for the fox. I was even more surprised that almost get a nod of approval when the film came back from the lab. The footage is great, said Wooly. There's just one thing. You shot a couple of scenes of the actor in profile. You should have done a 3/4 front. That would have been stronger. You'll get the hang of it, though. I thanked him for the advice and headed for the door. He called me back. I resigned myself for more criticism, but Wooly surprised me yet again. There's a combination live action and animation picture coming up. Pete's Dragon. Don Chaffee will be directing it. Ken Anderson has designed a fabulous fat reptile with a pink wig. Ken feels that you'd be perfect to direct the animation on Elliot. Who's Elliot? The dragon, he said impatiently. Go talk to Ken. This will give you the experience you need behind live-action cameras. You'll need to be on set because Elliot's a big dragon. We'll need a wide shot where we draw his entire body. You'll need to look through the viewfinder of the camera to be sure that Don Chaffee is leaving enough room in the frame for you and your team to draw Elliot. Again, I saluted Wooly and headed for the door. And again, he called me back. Hit this out of the ballpark. I stuffed my feelings of dread deep inside. I won't let you down, sir. I promise. As instructed, I knocked on Ken Anderson's door to get briefed on the dragon called Elliot. Ken had been a pillar in the Disney studio for decades. I'll be on the soundstage with you, he said, but I would like you to take the lead with the live-action director, Don Chaffee. The sketches on Ken's wall were enchanting, and so was Ken's description of Elliot's personality. He was as enthusiastic about his dragon as a little boy, and when I left Ken's room, I don't think my feet were touching the floor. The magic of animation was sparkling still. It just needed a little tender guidance. If that meant I had to be a director, well then, so be it. Leadership skills. Pete's Dragon was to star Helen Reddy, and the legendary stars Mickey Rooney and Shelley Winters, acting against the boy Pete, played by Sean Marshall, and Elliot, the animated dragon. The dragon designer, Ken Anderson, never stopped creating. He was either talking about a new idea or sketching one. For the longest time, there was a search for Elliot's voice. The enchanted dragon must not speak, proclaimed. The enchanted dragon must not speak, proclaimed Ken. That would kill the magic. He just makes sounds, and the only one that can understand his language will be the boy Pete. Charlie Callis, a former drummer for the Dommy Dorsey Orchestra and other big bands, moved into the comedy world in the 1960s and became known as the comedian who pulled funny faces and made loony sounds. Ken loved the weird noises that came from Charlie's lips. On the page of the script, Elliot's lines were written in English, but what Charlie did with it certainly wasn't English. The town of Passamaquoddy was a set built on the Disney back lot. Most of the film was shot there, or on soundstage number 2. Being surrounded by the famous movie stars cast in Pete's Dragon took some getting used to. It surpassed Betty Hutton's baking powder biscuit for sure. There were stars in my eyes, and the real ones were standing less than 10 feet away. Helen Reddy, shy and soft-spoken, despite her well-known song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. The Grand Monarch, Mickey Rooney, full of suggestions for the director. The big musical number was There's Room for Everyone in This World, set on the streets of Passamaquoddy. The film's choreographer was Ona White, lauded as one of the choreographic geniuses of her generation, with such stage credits to her name as Irma LaDouce, Mommy, and Gigi, and films accoladed that include The Music Man, Bye Bye Birdie, and Oliver. Employing 2 young dancers to teach the chorus the moves, she spent most of her time on the set sitting in a chair, knitting. Ona's signature step was the bell kick, a youthful leap into the air while clicking her heels together to one side, and landing on your feet without breaking your neck. The crew went for it in a big way. Everyone tried doing it, me included, but none of us remotely resembled the grace of the dancers. Ona watched patiently and chuckled politely to herself and continued to knit. A lesson, perhaps, is letting kids be kids. When Mickey Rooney speaks. One morning, as we waited for the fog to clear around on location lighthouse shot, I caught Mickey Rooney staring at me. Thinking that he was waiting for me to acknowledge him, I shyly ventured, I hope this turns out to be a great movie. Of course it will, he snorted. What a silly thing to say. Who are you? I'm the animator of the Dragon, I replied. Well, I'm glad to meet you. I'll do my best. You do the same. And then he walked away. I vowed to choose my words more carefully around him. Case in point, later that day, a journalist from a local newspaper was scheduled to interview Mr. Rooney. The publicist introduced her to the star. They both sat down to begin the interview, and her opening question to Mr. Rooney was, What year were you born? Mr. Rooney stood up and walked away. The interview was over. His birthday was available in the press kit. She should have known better. She should have come up with a more serious question, one worthy of a star. ITM, thank you for the $20, man. That's crazy. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Ever heard of Making Friends? It was a web show by Andy Winfrey. Nickelodeon brought the rights and made a show that only lasted 8 episodes. It was a sad story. Now Amy can't even continue the web show. I recommend. I've never heard of it, no, but I'll look it up later. But thank you for the $20, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Wooly smiled. My animation crew for Pete's Dragon were the same young trainees as the small one. Just listen to the lineup. Randy Cartwright, Ron Clements. Ron Clements, he would go on to direct He would be one of the directors on Treasure Planet. Really talented guy there. Gary Goldman, of course. Bill Haye, Chuck Harvey, Cliff Nordyoung, John Pomeroy, Chuck Williams, and Dale Barr. On my side, I was determined to do better this time around. I wanted Wooly to love the final result. So there were a few adjustments in the way I handed out the assignments. I talked about the acting in each shot, like what Elliot might be thinking when he makes his sounds. Make them laugh, make them cry, just like Walt had been challenged to do with Snow White, I kept telling the crew. Underlying the labor-intensive work of hand inking and painting countless cells over live-action frames was my resolve that the relationship of the boy and the dragon was at the heart of the movie. This has to be right. It has to touch the human spirit and be entertaining. With this mission, we worked ceaselessly as a team until, at last, we were ready for the first screens of the animated sequences. Elliot, the animated dragon, finally put a smile on Wooly's face. He was pleased with the trainees, and I knew these talented animators were bound for glory. The bad news was that Elliot was so adorable that the producer of the film, Ron Miller, the guy sitting in Walt's chair, wanted to increase the animated footage by a third. You may say that's good news, right? Well, the release date for the picture had already been set for November 3rd, 1977. In order to add more sequences and still finish the picture on time, my crew and I would have to work nights and weekends to get it done, long after the janitors left each morning. The team and I would be drawing furiously with every scene that Elliot appeared in crossing my desk so that I could review it and make corrections. We were exhausted, pushed to our limits, and we weren't even getting paid as there was no money in the budget for overtime, and they didn't add any. They did give us 1 day off for every overtime day we worked. A nice gesture, admittedly. How we got the sequences complete is only due to the dedication of the crew. Inwardly, I seethed. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. Damn right. Shit. Man. I've had those days, working overtime with no pay. It's bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. The plot thickens on The Fox and the Hound. In 1977, work began on The Fox and the Hound, the last film directed and animated by the 9 old men. With Woolley still at the helm of director, I was installed as one of the directing animators, but the CalArt kids in the bullpen were flexing their creative muscles. The CalArt kids saw The Fox and the Hound as their movie, and let me know in no uncertain terms they did not want me to be their director. Another lesson Woolley taught me, somebody who's a friend to all won't get a picture made. Sorry, let me read it again. Another lesson Woolley taught me, somebody who's a friend to all won't get a picture made. If you cave into being friends, the movie will suffer. You have to serve the movie first, not yourself. The powers that be, your own ambition, or anyone else's. We argued and lost our tempers over characters, lines, colors, anything and everything, even using live-action models for reference in animation. Really, I mean, what a silly argument. Walt has been using human models ever since Snow White. He used them in Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and 101 Dalmatians. In my opinion, you can't wing it when you're trying to capture the subtlety of human autonomy and movement, but the more I tried reasoning, coaxing, even listening to their point of view, the angrier they became. To my dismay, when I phrased traditional hand-drawn animation, they pointed to the wonders of the new technology, computer graphic images, or CGI. I bitterly regretted that the future of Disney's animation was in their hands. CGI. But isn't it interesting that CGI has settled that argument once and for all? Animators use live-action reference all the time now, with some directors going further with a process called motion capture. An actor's movements are recorded and fed into a computer program, which then applies a wireframe puppet to the sequence. To me, that process more closely relates to puppetry than animation, pulling strings on a marionette or pushing buttons on a computer model. It's all the same to me. He's kind of got a point, isn't it? It's like there's not really much work in animation when it comes to motion capture as much as you would like actually drawing the character or whatever. You know, with motion capture, you really are just processing it through a computer, aren't you? Work on Banjo continued over the weekends, with 17 people crowded into that tiny garage. The weekday work on The Fox and the Hound was feeling more and more lackluster, except for Frank Thomas's and Ollie Johnston scenes. To save money on the Disney movie, we were beginning to eliminate minute details. No cast shadows, no reflections in the water, no colored ink lines to soften the characters, no sparkles or wisps of smoke unless absolutely necessary. But can we make this look better at least? I pleaded with the suits. I told them about our work on Banjo, not that they give a hoot, but I just wanted to show them what we were learning. So what if you didn't have money for a reflection? Turn the cells upside down, blur the lens, shoot the frame, and voila! The answer was always no. When I was first working at Disney as a kid, people would ask, what would Walt do? No more. The suits and the stockholders were prevailing over the artist. Cost is important. Making dreams into reality means they have to be viable. So I wondered if I was being entirely fair. I consulted the man in the mirror. Am I crazy? I asked. Without hesitation, he replied, no, but you are stubborn. That turns people off. Yeah, it does, don't it? What am I supposed to do with all these newbies in the bullpen? I complained. No matter what I suggest, they take issue with it. The image stared at me for the longest time, then said, Woolley warned you that there were going to be jealousies. He said to grow a thick skin. Or were you going to run away from the fight, the way you always do? You're calling me a coward? Well, if the poo shits. That's what it says here. The writing on the wall. Over the years, there is one thing I've learned for sure. When conflict enters the room, creativity exits. With a heavy heart, I called Ron Miller's office and requested an audience. Almost instantly, I found myself sitting in a chair in front of his desk. He stared at me in dismay as I explained my situation. Ron, I said, I do not want to direct a group of people who don't want me to direct. Ron sighed and admitted, some of the trainees have also been in here. Brad Bird, Jerry Reese, John Musker, he would also direct Treasure Planet, Bill Croyer, all of them sitting in the very chair you're in. They say that you are arrogant, self-serving, and elitist. Is that true? Good heavens, I hope I'm none of that, I stammered. I don't see myself as any special guy. I'm sorry they feel that way, but I love traditional animation. I love the studio and all that it represents. I grew up dreaming of working here. I'm just worried that we're losing the magic. I know that costs are a big concern. I see us cutting corners and losing quality on the screen. I paused. He listened to me, surely. You know about the short we're making in my garage, right? Yes, I've heard about that, Ron answered impatiently. And if you're thinking of getting us to produce it, the answer is no. Ouch. I was just going to bring it up as an example of good old American can-do. Right. Well, I'm not the one to lead this new generation. Maybe they do know a better way. Ron's brow furrowed. But Wooly wants you to be the director. Well, those kids don't. So where are we? Asked Ron. Are you quitting? I recall that he's been a Rams football player. A fighter. Well, a fighter too, I said. Well, I'm a fighter too, I said to myself. I'm not a coward, but I just don't want to fight somebody. I want to fight for something. Traditional, handcrafted animation. I'd promised John Lansbury, no, I'm not going on another mission. I'm here for the long haul. Well, Don? I sighed. No, I'm not going to quit. But let me do what I do best. I'm a good animator, and I can still serve as that on The Fox and the Hound. Let the bullpen find their own director. He reluctantly nodded. If you change your mind, Don, he said, please let me know. I thought that climbing back down the corporate ladder would let me stay at Disney. Instead, however, it raised even more questions in others' minds. Why would someone like me walk away from directing? People who used to smile and nod when I passed by them in the hallways now scowled. I no longer felt at home at Disney. What would Walt do? I asked. I pondered. She is worth as much as a man. Animation during the Golden Age was dominated by men. Retta Scott, the first woman to receive a screen credit on a Disney film, was the exception. A graduate at the Chinoid, Art Institute, Retta joined the Disney Company in 1938 to work in the story department. Her skill stunned the male artist, who had assumed that only a man could create drawings with such intensity. At a time when women were considered for a menial animator task, except Mary Blair for her genius in color styling, Retta animated the scene in Bambi where hunter dogs chase Bambi, his mother, and his friend, the Dauphin. The other animators, all male, felt threatened by Retta. They complained, and in response, Walt wrote a memo to his animators chastising them for their silly attitude. If a woman can do the work as well, she is worth as much of a man. The woman's artists have a right to expect the same chances as men, and I honestly believe they may eventually contribute something to the business that men never could or would. Damn, surprisingly based Walt Disney. Okay, I didn't expect that. Don't tell modern conservatives that. If they found out that Walt was woke as fuck, they're gonna shit themselves. Don't tell them. Don't tell them. Even in 1979, during the making of Banjo the Woodpile Cat, men still dominated the animation business. Women were relegated to assistants, color stylists, inkers, or painters. Instead, Gary, John, and I opened my garage door for the women who were aspiring to be animators. Linda Miller, Lorna Pomeroy, Emily Giuliano, and Helda Gundel, all assistants at Disney, were given scenes to animate on the Banjo short. When I was assigned to direct the animation on Pete's Dragon, I said to myself, these 4 women can animate. I requested that management promote them, and they were reclassified as animators. I attribute much of our success in animating Elliot the Dragon, and for the entire movie, to them. Disney now had a fresh stable of feminine talent with sharp pencils and even sharper wits. So, how did this affect the business? Dramatically. Ideas from both sexes came together on the big screen. The result resonated clearly on both sides of the room. Furthermore, the simple-minded, half-witted heroine of the past vanished. The era of the dumb blonde references and jokes was thankfully over. Quit talking and begin doing. The man in the mirror was getting sick of all my grousing around this current state of animation. Disney in the bullpen. If you really want the beauty of classical animation to continue, then get off your butt and do something about it. Walt had something to say about this. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. I am doing, I said angrily. I didn't sit around and wait for Eric Larson to teach me how to direct. I organized a group of people and spent my own money to make Banjo the Woodpile Cat. I mortgaged my house to pay for the orchestra. Remember how Pinocchio built a fire in the belly of the whale to make him sneeze? What are you talking about? Be proactive. Leave Disney and go make your own movies. Money to make a feature film isn't just lying around, I snapped. Do you believe in animation or not? The reflection shot back. Okay, I'll leave, I shouted, and then it hit me. Disney will declare war. I groaned and put my head in my hands. I thought of the banjo crew, crowding in the garage each weekend, trying things out, arguing and debating, excited about their work. If I walked out on Disney, they'd join me. And if we failed, they could get hurt. I couldn't do that. I am a coward, I grumbled. Maybe you're just realistic, advised the reflection. Courage. Remember the black moment idea you guys were talking about? Well, guess what? You're in it, which means your third act is nigh. Aurora, the first appearance of Morning Light. Ken Anderson had recommended that I read Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH by Robert O'Brien. It's about a mother mouse who must ask a group of former laboratory rats to help save her family from destruction by the farmer's plow. I thought it was a terrific story. It wasn't surprised at hearing that Disney was contemplating optioning it. Ultimately, Disney passed. The story was too dark, and they didn't want to do another mouse movie. I'm glad they did. Disney was busy appealing to a younger audience and its stockholders. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH is a tale filled with grit, not a Disney film by any measure. You can argue that the story of a brave mouse who, against all odds, saves her family was like us working to save traditional hand-drawn animation. We did so with the help of Aurora, a newly formed company of former Disney executives, Richard Irving, James L. Stewart, and John Lang. James Stewart got wind of the Moonlight project in my garage and asked if he could see the film. We obliged, and he asked to meet. That conversation changed everything. Let me put a question to you fellas, said Jim to Gary, John, and I. We were trying not to look too hopeful, eager, or nervous. I can tell from your work on Banjo that you know what you're doing. If I could raise the money, do you guys think you could make an animated feature film, one that could compete with Disney? I answer for the three of us. Of course we can. And with NIMH in my head, I know the perfect story. Can you get the money? I have contacts, he responded. Give me a copy of Banjo to show my client. It isn't finished, I protested. It's finished enough to get my attention, he said. He steepled his fingers, looking at each of us in turn. The real question is, are you guys willing to leave Disney? Gary, John, and I looked at each other. Although Disney Studios was filled with the frustrations of the changing guard and new vision for the future, it was a safe place to work, with a weekly paycheck. Did we have the courage to walk? And suppose we did. What about the crew? Would they follow? We made polite answers and put aside the question for another day. Jim was blowing smoke anyway. He would never get the money, we told ourselves. Then we got the phone call. I had to sit down to keep from fainting dead away. Jim had a letter of intent. He had a commitment of $6.3 million from an angel, Mr. Joel Greenberg from Chicago, to fund the feature. And he even had extra money so that we could finish Banjo. I was just shy of 42 years old. Gary was 7 years younger at age 35, and John was 7 years younger than Gary. All three of us were young enough to make career moves. But by tendering our resignations, we would immediately be branded as traitors to the Disney empire. We would never be forgiven, ever. And neither would anyone have followed us. We needed to hear from the Banjo crew themselves. The following Saturday, we called everyone together. I hemmed and hawed, but then finally stammered out the news. To my surprise, Everyone began jumping around my garage like grasshoppers, hollering and shouting, yes, let's do it! So John, Gary, and I weren't the only ones who had it. And wanted to strike out in new directions. Not everyone's spouses would be so excited by the possibility of losing a steady paycheck, but I was proud, and maybe stupid, but emboldened by the investment from our Chicago angel. The final break. On September 13th, 1979, the day I turned 42, Gary, John, and I entered Ed Hanson's office. He was the production manager in the animation department at the time. We handed him 3 envelopes. He opened one, then another, and then the last, dropping them to the desk as he read. I'll never forget the look on Ed's face. You've got to be kidding me. You're going to throw it all away? I said more brazenly than I actually felt. Think of it as us offering Disney some friendly competition. He laughed in our faces. Now I know you're crazy. Then he paused, a scowl growing. Just how many staffers are you taking with you? We don't know, Gary replied. They'll be making up their own minds. 17. That's how many staffers resigned that day. With newspapers, radios, and TV picking up the story, management and shareholders were embarrassed, not to mention frustrated. We heard that Don Duckwell, who was in charge of the training program at the time, guffawed and said, "Oh, they'll be back. They'll never pull it off. Others have tried and failed." Far from being the hero of the story, I was labeled the instigator, the villain. We heard the news that Ron Miller had pulled the remaining staffers into a meeting to announce the cancer had been removed. Now we've moved forward to a brighter future. Seriously? The cancer? Between 1971 and 1979, I had tried to serve the art of animation under the Disney umbrella. Now I was on my own. With a talented team of animators, Disney finally had some real competition. We, as Don Bluth Productions, would go on to produce 11 feature animated films before the Disney machine stopped us in our tracks. And here's a drawing of the 3 of them all handing in their letters of resignation to Ron Miller. He's very, very pissed, as you can tell. It's like, what the fuck, guys? Come on. Hello, Sky Nation. It's good to see you. Act 3, The Windows of Heaven. It's 1:30. I might read 1 or 2 more chapters and call it. Act 3, Windows of Heaven. It's a picture of him on a cloud with like heaven and stuff. He has a dog now. If the dog dies, we're done reading. I'm not reading any more book. I'm not reading anymore. Just saying. I'm just kidding. But yeah. Chapter 15. Welcome to Don Bluth Productions. One day in the alleyway behind my home in Culver City, I came across a little broken lamp. Cleaning up the alleyway before working on The Secret of NIMH was just part of my morning routine. Each day I had to clean up the mess left the previous night, when cars zoomed up, dumped their unwanted trash, and disappeared into the night. While cleaning up the mess, I nearly tossed the lamp into the trash can. But what an interesting shape that it had. Just the kind of thing a mouse might use for an elevator. That's how the lamp became the model for the convenient. That's exactly how the lamp became the model for the elevator that takes Mrs. Brisby, Mr. Ages, and the captain of the guard, Justin, down to the mysterious world of the rats to meet Nicodemus. That little lamp had a glorious destiny. A few months after the movie was completed, I went on a press junket to Paris to promote the film. At a very posh movie museum, I received an award for The Secret of NIMH. After the event, chatting with guests, I noticed a display of props used in the film, part of the museum's collection. Drawn to it, I peered into the case and spotted my humble little lamp, illuminated by her very own spotlight. She was resting on a red velvet cushion under a crystal dome. This made me smile. "Well, aren't you the bee's knees?" I said. "You've done very well for yourself. You found a home in Paris." I'm sure it was just my imagination, but I thought the little lamp blew me a kiss. Maybe that lamp also had the feeling that her future would be bright, no matter how many dings and scratches she got along the way. In leaving Disney, I had no idea if the movies Don Bluth Productions created would end up in the trash or win awards. I just followed the voice that told me it was the right thing to do. And saints be praised for the other artists who had the courage to walk away from the Disney empire along Gary, John, and me. Jeff Eder, Will Finn, Heidi Goodell, Bruce Heller, Tom Hush, Emily Giuliano, Skip Jones, Dan Kushner, Diane Lando, Doris Lanfer, Linda Miller, Dave Molina, Vera Pancino, Vera Paccio. I might be saying some of these names wrong, honestly. Jeff Patch, Lorna Pomeroy, Dave Spafford, and Kevin Wersner. As Crazy Legs and Banjo sings, I'll stick with you, kid, you'll stick with me. Together we'll overcome adversity. See, I remember that song. It's such a good song. Not a beat was dropped between our exodus and the day we convened again in my garage to pick up the pencils and paintbrushes to complete Banjo and develop the script and character designs for The Secret of NIMH. My garage was buzzing days, nights, and weekends. We were a happy family who loved working together, and we were motivated to show Disney just what we could do. I was raised to believe that you don't look for reasons why you can't do something. You find reasons that you can. To make The Secret of NIMH, we needed a bigger studio to house more staffers, like sound and visual effects folks, a camera crew, assistant animators, the in-betweeners, the painters, and the checkers, not to mention editors, composers, and musicians. So while a real estate agent scoured Studio City for a new home for Don Bluth Productions, the 17 crew members who had joined the Exodus kept working in my garage on Banjo and spread their desks throughout my house. With more mouths to feed and many more dishes to wash, I hired a cook. Irene had a gleam in her eye, a crooked smile, and the shrill voice of a magpie. When she wasn't talking, she was singing. Even Irene played a part in the creation of The Secret of NIMH, as you'll see. There was this one room that was off limits to everyone, my bedroom. It was my laughing place, my refuge. We didn't have the money to upgrade to better equipment, such as a camera stand with a larger bed for artwork. Luckily, we had Fred Craig, a mechanical genius. He never did anything small, or being a perfectionist on schedule, for that matter. Even with his roster of tooling companies to help him build the camera stand, it took him nearly 6 months to do the job. It was well worth the wait, however, to have the most beautiful camera stand I had ever seen. And that's not all. He ended up building 2 of them. Now that we've left the protection of the Disney fold, the responsibility of supporting the crew and staff working in my house round the clock, even napping under their animation desk, was weighing on our shoulders. Cue a call from our producer and director, Larry Gordon. Larry asked me, were we interested in producing 1 minute of animation for the live-action movie Xanadu? The schedule for turning around storyboards and animation seemed insanely tight, but the money was good. So we squeezed Xanadu in. Or rather, I did. I didn't want to interrupt the crew's work, so I animated most of the 1 minute sequence myself. Larry told me he'd like the animated sequence to fit with the song "Don't Walk Away," and I vaguely knew that the movie was about a guy opening a roller disco with the help of his muse. Oh, and it starred Olivia Newton-John and Michael Beck. Anything else I should know? I asked. He waved his hand airily. Go do whatever you want. I listened to the song "Don't Walk Away" over and over again, letting my imagination take me wherever it fancied. I composed storyboards that show the 2 lovers playfully chasing each other and magically transforming into fantastical animals. This had a practical side too. Birds and fish are a lot more appealing to viewers and easier to draw than in their human form. Then, with the help of a couple of crew members, the animation was drawn, inked, and shot. And just like that, our bank account magically stretched to cover a few more weeks. So yeah, you might have seen that. If you look up the Xanadu animation part, you'll probably see that. It was like it's basically that animation sequence with 2 fishes and such. I've seen it. It's very well done. With our focus on Banjo and NIMH, I didn't think much more about the sequence until Xanadu's premiere. In 1980, at the Cinerama's Dome in Hollywood Boulevard, I was sitting in the audience with our crew when the opening of "Don't Walk Away" started my heart pounding like a timpani drum. I sank deeper into my seat and squeezed my eyes shut. What have I done? I muttered. What if everyone hated the first public viewing of Don Bluth Studios' work? What if they laughed? Who would ever hire us again? This is a sophisticated audience, I berated myself. No one's going to like seeing Olivia Newton-John flirting around as a cartoon bird. Or flitting around as a cartoon bird. Waiting for the sequence to end and the mocking laughter to begin was the longest 60 seconds of my life. When I heard cheers, however, when I opened my eyes, when I heard cheers, I opened my eyes to see the audience rising to their feet in applause. I wanted to cheer too, but I was laughing too hard with relief. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, I got a call from a band I'd never even heard of, the Sister Scissors. They remember seeing that sweet little Xanadu sequence when they were kids and wanted me to animate something for a video of theirs. Life is full of little surprises like that. Meanwhile, at the Mouse House, a few little birds were telling me news from Disney. Wooly had been asked to step down as the director of The Fox and the Hound. He handed the director's baton to Art Stevens, but as one of the producers of the film, Wooly just couldn't keep from butting into Stevens' territory. Like the time Wooly felt like there was a sag in the action around the halfway point of the movie, he came up with the idea of putting a musical number in that spot that featured a dancing flamingo. He actually got as far as casting the Spanish singer and actress Charo as the voice and model for the flamingo before Art threw a tantrum at Ron Miller's office and Wooly had to back off. Yeah, a flamingo in Fox and the Hound, that would have been kind of weird, wouldn't it have? Yeah, I would not have liked that, to be honest with you. But those troubles were nothing compared to our exodus. They delayed the release date from the Fox and the Hound by a full year because they didn't have enough experienced animators. Of course, that was deemed my fault. I felt guilty until I realized that was just the scapegoat for the bigger problems that Disney was having. We weren't the only ones to leave the Disney ship. Larry Clemens, a veteran scriptwriter for Disney, decided he had had enough and walked. Remember the big four from the CalArts bullpen? The guys with the extravagant ideas about the future? John Lasseter was fired in 1983. John Lasseter, who was fired in 83, started his own company in CG animation. Bill Croyer left to form his own 2D animation studio. Jerry Reese left the industry altogether. And Dan Haskett joined another studio. Even Ron Miller would soon be out the door. In 1984. By then, Disney's own nephew, Roy Disney Jr., who generally stayed out of the spotlight, had grown convinced that Ron Miller was steering Disney in the wrong direction. So out went Ron Miller, and in came Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg. By the way, I'd had my own run-in with Roy Disney John at a tiny pub in Cork, Ireland. Wait till you hear about that one. Our new home. Finally, the day came when Don Bluth Productions found a home in Studio City on Ventura Boulevard, in a beautiful building we called the Swiss Chalet. The building had a blue-tiled roof and a spacious balcony circling the top floor, shaded by eucalyptus trees. Our studio even overlooked a river, if you could call a trickle meandering through the cement galleys of the LA river system a river, but we finally had our own workplace, and I got my house in Culver City back. Hallelujah. Banjo, the short that started it all, was finished and in the can. We showed it to some small venues, but it wouldn't be seen it wouldn't be seen in bigger theaters for a couple more years after The Secret of NIMH was released. So with just NIMH in the works, 60 of us, busy as bees, worked day and night at the Swiss Chalet. We tasked people with taking cells home, along with bottles of paint, brushes, and little guides that showed where they should paint their assigned colors. People with common sense might ask, just 60 people to create a full-length animated feature? Were we crazy? We were naive, and perhaps that was our strength. The glue that kept us together was our dream to restore hand-drawn animation to its golden age. That and a big competitive streak. We were gung-ho about toppling Disney from its animation pedestal. And there's a nice little drawing of, I guess, Don's, a little gag of DreamWorks. Check it out. Don actually did a little parody of DreamWorks Animation's logo right there. Ha! It's really nice, actually. Chapter 16. This might be the last chapter for the day, guys, because I am getting a little tired. And plus, I do need to get to work on my next video. It's a very long one, so I do need to get to work on it. So this might be my last chapter for the day. Chapter 16. The Secret of NIMH's Lessons and Self-Reliance. If Robert C. O'Brien's novel had crossed Walt's desk when he was alive, I believe Disney would have made The Secret of NIMH. The book had everything that can make a good movie. Tops for me is its life or death struggle. A helpless widow mouse must save her son Tiffany Timothy from the blades of a farmer's plow. She cannot carry him out of the cinder block home to safety because he has pneumonia, and the chill in the air might kill him. He meets a group of mysterious rats who have become highly intelligent due to laboratory experiments at the National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH. Their leader, Nicodemus, tells her how they only managed to escape NIMH with the help of her late husband, Jonathan. In gratitude, the rats assist the mouse by moving the cinder block and her family to the lee of the stone, away from the plow. In return, she warns the rats that the scientists from NIMH are going to exterminate them, and the rats escape again just before the scientists can arrive with their extermination gear. I tell you, the book is an absolute page-turner. Writing the hero in The Secret of NIMH. Back when we were discussing with Aurora when to leave Disney, Walt's biographer, Bob Thomas, had given me 3 questions to answer before I start a movie. Who's your hero, who's your villain, and who's your clown? I've used these 3 questions to start every single movie I've made. The character of the timid yet brave Mrs. Frisbee in the movie reminded me of my grandmother. My mother's mom had 13 children with my granddad, and when he died, she had no way to support raising them. The only thing she knew how to do was cook. So she took on boarders, cooking, and washing for them to make ends meet. It wasn't easy for her, but she did it. She told me whenever I visited her as a kid, whatever problem you have, just put your shoulder to that wheel and go forward. Mrs. Frisbee had her guardian angels too. The first, the great owl, is surrounded by the bones of little creatures he had eaten, including a lot of mice. He charts the course that Mrs. Frisbee must follow to save Timothy. Go to the rats, he says. They must move your house to the lee of the stone. The second guardian, Nicodemus, the rat, gives her both knowledge, the history of the rats, and a mysterious amulet, which has the power to save her family if she can figure out how to harness it. These 2 guardians are the same spirit in 2 different forms. Speaking of guardian angels, you might be wondering where Oscar, my own guardian angel, has been. I believe as children we have a connection to the world of guardian spirits, and that connection sometimes disappears as we grow up. But as I look back on my life, I know Oscar was there working behind the scenes. How else could we have walked away from the Disney Empire and still make 11 films? To me, that shows a bit of guardian angel oversight. When Mrs. Frisbee became Mrs. Brisby. Well into the production of NIMH, we discovered that we could not have the name Brisby thanks to a popular Mattel toy called a Frisbee. Worse, the voices had already been recorded, and incurring the cost of re-recording was out of the question. Little did we know that our industrious sound designer, David Horton, was already trying to fix the problem. While everyone at the studio was up in arms at this unwelcome news, wringing hands and pointing fingers, David was busily scrapping one scene's magnetic soundtrack with a RaisorBlade, removing the F from Frisbee. He then spliced in its place a B sound. We were still arguing about what to do when over the studio's sound system came the deep, spooky voice of John Carradine as the Great Owl. Brisby. Mrs. Jonathan Brisby. We fell silent and gaped at one another. There, said David's voice over the speaker. No one will ever know the difference. Stop your caterwauling and let's get back to work. He had to scrape countless F's off the tape and replace them with B's, but that did the trick. It's actually kind of incredible how they managed to do that. I'm also admit I've actually had to do that sometimes. Sometimes I'll have to like cut a certain line out somewhere. Like I'm meant to say like a singular word, but I'll end up saying a plural by accident. So I have to cut the S off real quick. I have to do that sometimes myself. Sometimes. Drawing the villain. Walt once said to Irving Ludwig, his marketing guru, let me make the pictures. When I'm done, then you can market them. Without a heavy-handed marketing department telling me what characters to design, I felt free to tell the story I wanted to tell. Like Walt, I wanted to tell stories that reach for the soul. With NIMH, we could start at the beginning, creating the script ourselves, finding the conflict that gets every story going between good and evil. Have you ever heard someone say, I love the book, but I hated the movie? That can happen. Something can get lost between words and images, a sort of spirit. To try and keep some of the spirit, I think of animation like a performance, with the animators as actors, telling the tale on the stage of the silver screen. It's like I tell my students,
Animation is not about just following on model drawings. This will create technically good animation, but not a performance that shows emotional depth. Here's an example. As animators/actors, our task was to show the conflict between the heroic rat Justin, the captain of the guard, and the power-hungry rat Jenner. In the story, Justin believes that the rats can only survive if they learn to become self-sufficient, while Jenner wants the rats to continue to steal their food and power from the farmer. Justin has rallied the rats of NIMH to seek a new land, Thorn Valley, for the rat civilization, while Jenner wants to kill Justin for ruining his plans. We asked ourselves, how can we make Jenner a worthy foe of Justin? We decided that Jenner would be as devious and underhanded as Justin was honorable and brave. The audience must believe that the villain might actually win in order to feel satisfaction when the hero eventually does. We drew from observation. You'll meet our model. You'll meet our model Waldo a little later. We pretended to fight, puffing and roaring around the studio with imaginary swords. We looked like fools, but what insight. Watch that scene. Jenner's hatred of his opponent Justin intensifies during the battle. As adrenaline surges in his veins, his eyes narrow, his fur bristles, his reactions quicken. Did you know that scene and stage actors refer to their bodies as their instruments and use them to play a range of emotional tunes? I think of drawing in the same way. They are the medium or the language in which we can express something more. By the time Jenner and Justin had their showdown, I wanted the audience to feel like this wasn't just a choreographed fight between two warriors. It was about good versus evil. Take what you can, when you can. I've learned this much. Take what you can, when you can, growls Jenner. Then you've learned nothing, returns Justin. I won't spoil the ending of the scene for you. It'll knock your socks off. Jenner dies. Yeah, I'm fun like that. Some investors fretted about the ferocity of Justin and Jenner's battle. It's not Disney, they complained. Well, Walt's queen wanted to murder Snow White, I remind you. That's Disney. Finding the clown. Jeremy the Crow grew out of unrequited love, a real character builder feeling, to be sure. I'd find the bird's crow only mildly interesting, so it was pleasant to... I found the book's crow only mildly interesting. Yeah, that's the way to say it. So I was pleased in the choice of Dom DeLuise as Jeremy's voice. Dom has a wonderful comic range, so finding a new spin on this character intrigued me. I recalled an old college roommate of mine named Bruce. College for Bruce had very little to do with education. He was there searching for Miss Right. My, how he could talk, but always on the same subject, sex. She's out there somewhere, Bruce would say, staring out the window, and when I find her, I'm going to take her in my arms and, okay, Bruce, I'd interrupt before he got into the details. I get the picture. Bruce was a handsome guy, but when he danced, oh, God love him, he was like a clumsy male rhino during rutting season. Women stayed away from him in droves. His dilemma has always touched me, even when I found it ridiculously funny. What if, I said to myself, we put Bruce's personality inside Jeremy the Crow? He could follow Mrs. Brisby with endless questions about how to court the girl Crow, which would be funny and a great subplot. Still, I felt like something was missing. The Crow needed more definition. Then I remembered Irene, who had been our cook for the crew staying in my house. I used to notice Irene staring at me. It always made me uncomfortable, so one day I spoke up. Irene, I said pleasantly, I can't help but notice that you keep looking at me. Have I done something wrong? Instantly, she was pressed against me, her strong arms wrapped around my waist. Can't you feel it? There's something in the air, she purred. It's the call of the wild. What the fuck? What the fuck? I firmly but gently pushed her away. Irene, you have a husband and 3 children. Kiss me now or I shall die, she said, wrapping her arms around me again. I once more extricated myself and said, I will not kiss you. Go home and take a cold shower. That wasn't the end of her amorous pursuit. The man in the mirror regularly reminded me that her apparent animal magnetism was nothing. He avoided using the word homely, but I always knew I was a behind the camera sort of guy, definitely not a leading man. Unfortunately, Irene never got the memo, and eventually I had to give her a pink slip. Looking for Miss Wright and The Call of the Wild put them together, and bingo. Can't you feel it? Jeremy says in the mirror. It's the call of the wild. She's out there somewhere, and I'll find her. Now we have a clown that's fit for Dom DeLuise. Damn, so Don actually tried to... So yeah, the fucking cook tried to hook up with Don, and he said no. Wow, that's crazy. See, Dom DeLuise. I had a good fortune to work with Dom on The Secret of NIMH, An American Tale, and All Dogs Go to Heaven. Don could light up a room just by saying hello. He was also a master of improvisation. There's a moment in the script where Jeremy the Crow sees Mrs. Brisby wearing the amulet Nicodemus gave her. When Don gave her the script, we heard a, "Ooh, what is that? I've always wanted a sparkly of my very own. Can I hold it? Oh, please, please." Whoops, groaned the sound engineer in the sound booth. Dom's off script again. Don made stuff up all the time. Jeremy was allergic to cats, and Dom invented the sneezing. Jeremy was clumsy, and his "excuse me, pardon me" lines were all Dom. I could never predict his dialogue. Off he veered from the written page on a whim. Anything could fumble from his mouth. Dom had a very vanilla image, but another vocabulary off mic, one that got people laughing. During one session, for some reason, Dom arrived with his 80-year-old Italian grandmother. She sat in the corner of the room, dressed in black as if she was in mourning, while Dom leaned into the microphone and read Jeremy's lines. "She's out there somewhere, and I'll find her if it's the last fucking thing I do. Ah, your mother's ass." He paused and wrote something on the page. "Let me try that again. I need some water." I threw a glance at his mother in black, sitting in the corner, happily smiling at her son. "It's okay," Dom assured me. "She's deaf and can't hear me, and she doesn't speak a word of English." Oh wow, that's funny. He brought his own mom to the recording booth just to swear a bunch and say like, "Oh, don't worry, she can't understand a bit of it." That's pretty funny. Let's see how many more pages to the next chapter. Okay. Art imitates life. Disney was making movies to make money. That was my goal too, as director, to foster a future of glorious and lucrative opportunities. But after Disney, I vowed never to seek that goal at the expense of the animation. For example, one of my pet peeves, I get that voices and storyboards hook invest. Excuse me, hiccup there. Storyboards hook and. For example, one of my pet peeves. I get that voices and storyboards hook investors, but today, character voices are first recorded with placeholder talent because it's simply cheaper than star talent. If investors like what they see and hear, only then are the stars hired. So basically, yeah, it's like that's why you see like pop stars and stuff in movies and animated movies as opposed to actual voice actors who know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And these stars have to reread and mimic what's already been recorded. Isn't that the silliest thing you've ever heard? That's exactly what happened in Space Jam 2. They actually got the original voice actors for Lola Bunny back, and she recorded all of her lines. But then, like, after all that was done, they brought Zoe Saldana. They brought, what's her fucking name? I can't fucking remember her name off the top of my head for some reason. She, you know who she is. The girl who played MJ in MCU. Hang on, this is gonna kill me. I gotta look this up. Zeldana, I think it was, like Zeldana something. No. What's her fucking name? I can't remember her name was. Zendaya, that's what it was. Thank you. I could not remember what her name. I could not remember it at all. It was not coming to my mind at all. But yeah, it was Zendaya. So yeah, they brought Zendaya in to do all the lines basically because Zendaya has stronger star power than the original voice actress. It's really shitty. I know that's not Zendaya's fault, of course, but like it's real shitty nonetheless. Timing and voice inflection are everything to an actor. Actors create the characters with us. Listening to the inflections of a star's voice works magic. Take for instance the mellifluous baritone voice of Paul Sinar. Our first spin on the design of the villainous Jenner was a repellent, thin, weary rat. But when Paul arrived on the soundstage to record, he had his own take on Jenner's character. He read Jenner's lines seductively, savoring each word and holding back from revealing too much of Jenner's malevolence. At first. How wonderfully deceptive, I thought. Such a rat would be very handsome indeed. Only after Paul read the real Jenner surface, we completely redrew our villain. Good ideas can be triggered by anything, so I keep open to what's around me. One day, a member of the staff came puffing her way up the stairs to announce that there was a large bird flopping around in the LA River. Gary led the investigating team into the cement gully and discovered an injured owl. They rescued the bird, and Gary took it to a vet, and the next morning, lo, I walk into the studio to discover the owl glaring at me from a cage hanging in the lobby. John Pomeroy, animator of The Great Owl, and this real bird spent hours and hours staring at each other, as if they were kindred spirits. As the bird healed, it grew more vocal, hooting, chattering, and even hissing in enjoyment of the bloody horse meat we fed it, which we kept in the studio fridge. Finally, Gary released the owl in his backyard, safely away from the LA River. He said that the owl looked at him without moving for the longest time, as if it were saying thank you and goodbye. Then it flew off, only to land on a rooftop a half mile away, next to another feathered speck. Gary said the two owls flew away together. Don't you just love a happy ending? So John and I had a vision of a fierce, vigorous, active, great owl. And then we arrived at Paramount to record the screen legend John Carradine reading his lines. I hadn't seen much of Carradine's work, just his later B-movie flicks and his horror movies, but his dramatic voice seemed perfect for the role. As we entered the recording studio, I noticed a spooky shadow on the tattered carpet from late afternoon, sunlight streaming through a broken iron grating. I thought Paramount's recording facilities would be a little more modern, I whispered to John. He hissed back, I'm sure this place is haunted. And so the ominous atmosphere within the Great Owl's tree home was born. In our assigned recording room, the sound technician greeted us, saying, Mr. Carradine just rang. He's on his way. I was expecting a grand movie star, but when Mr. Carradine limped through the door, he seemed so frail. He gripped his cane with knuckles swollen by arthritis and blinked at us through eyes filled with cataracts. His voice cracked with age when he said, I'm ready when you are. Yet as he spoke the lines with presence, what presence? All my ideas of the Great Owl reshuffled themselves. The character became an ancient yet powerful creature, and you'll notice that the Great Owl limps with arthritic feet. Oh yeah, the owl did limp a bit, didn't they? That's actually pretty interesting. So yeah, if you remember, the owl actually limped in the movie. He actually limped around a bit, so I guess that was inspired by John Carradine. That's actually really cool. As for Mrs. Brisby, I knew this was a challenging role. A lesser actress reading her lines could have pathetically whined her way from scene to scene, playing the victim. How off-putting that would have been. That's why Elizabeth Hartman was perfect. Elizabeth read the lines with an ever so slight tremble to her voice, turning Mrs. Brisby into a timid and unsure character. This choice also made us deeply invested in her struggle to save her family. I had just thought it was a clever way to read Mrs. Brisby's lines, only to learn years later that Elizabeth had died from suicide. I believe her skillfulness had hit a deep vulnerability. The quiver in Elizabeth's voice wasn't acting. It was really her. To this day, it's still painful for me to watch The Secret of NIMH. Wherever you are, my dear Elizabeth, thank you for Mrs. Brisby. Julie Andrews meets the rat. It's hard to draw a human well, and once the human anatomy starts to move, everything gets very complicated. If an animator is assigned to make a human character dance, or think that he or she can just make it up, well, the animator had better be up to the challenge. The reason why Snow White moves so beautifully is because Marge Champion was filmed walking and dancing. Believe me when I say that animators can't dance. So a few humans in NIMH were one shot in live action, and their movements become the template. And for the rats, a live action was our inspiration. One who brought me face to face with an old friend. On the second floor of the Swiss Chalet studio was a large room that looked over the LA River and a forest of eucalyptus trees. The door to the room was always shut. The 6 animators in the room, all guys, cherished their privacy, and upon the door in the inner sanctum, or the cave as they called it, it was a large sign that read, "Keep out." Besides the 6 animators, the cave had another inhabitant, Waldo, Dave Spafford's pet rat, the model for the rats of NIMH. The animators called Waldo their mascot. He roamed freely above their heads on a miniature catwalk near the ceiling that David built. One day in our office, I got word that we had a visitor, and she had asked for a tour of the studio. Immersed in storyboarding a scene, I gave my consent and went back to work. Some time passed, and the studio's quiet murmur was ripped by a very loud and very long scream. I dropped my pencil and dashed into the hallway. Out the door to the cave rushed our visitor, her face pale. I recognized Julie Andrews, who I'd seen when I was a pup watching the filming of Mary Poppins on the soundstage. Talk about wonders. "There's a rat in there," she gasped. "A real rat! Is there a place I could sit down?" Yes, I said hastily, leading her to the conference room. I profusely apologized for the rat and explained his essential role to NIMH. "Please forgive him," I pleaded, frantic she would be upset at me for her fright. "He's not used to celebrities, and he's quite harmless." Someday I would love to hear her version of the rat encounter. Come to think of it, I'd also like to hear the rat's version. Miss Andrews' scream had sent the poor creature cowering into the back of his cage. Dave tried to assure his pet that his famous movie star meant him no harm, but Waldo didn't come out of his cage for 2 days. Would Waldo have been less traumatized if Miss Andrews had sung Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious? Miss Andrews couldn't have known that I had met her before, in a way. During the summer of 1962, while I was working at Disney, I strolled out near Stage 2 to find its giant doors ajar. When I peeked in, I discovered a dance rehearsal in process. A beautiful woman and a handsome young man were dancing to the playback of a tune called Jolly Holiday. "Who is she?" I asked the guard in hushed tones. "That's Julie Andrews," said the guard. "Oh," I replied. "I never heard of her." "I wouldn't be saying that too loud," advised the guard. She was the star of My Fair Lady on Broadway." He gestured over my shoulder. "No more than 2 miles from this very spot over at Warner Brothers. They're filming My Fair Lady with Audrey Hepburn in the lead role. Mark my words, they're making a big mistake by not giving Miss Andrews a chance to play Eliza Doolittle in the film version. She's Oscar material. You'll see." Well, he was right about that. And sure enough, Julie Andrews won the Oscar for Best Actress in Mary Poppins. Walt saw that she had something special, even if no other film studio did at the time. Meanwhile, after NIMH, this Utah farm boy would soon get comfortable in the world of stars. Me now, I could recognize them on the street, and, if you believed it, sometimes they recognized me. Riding the Tiger. The elite members of the Los Angeles press were invited to a preliminary screening of NIMH on the MGM lot on March 30th, 1981. The producers and staff members, however, were not. I had to endure the agony of suspense until the following day's newspapers. The critics were kind. An artistic success, but the true test would be the box office numbers. When those started rolling in, I felt my stomach drop. With only a few theaters across the country, the totals of the opening weekend barely moved the needle. It was just our bad luck that United Artists, who had bought the distribution rights to our movie, had been sold the year before to MGM. United Artists would have pumped money into prints and ads to sell the movie, but without their backing, we became an orphan with a distribution budget of 0. No publicity, no audience, and maybe no more movies for Don Bluth Productions. By the way, Disney's newest experiment in computer animation, Tron, was also released in July 1982, the same month as NIMH. Coincidence? Quick aside, not a coincidence. How do I know? Well, because years later, during Gary and I's first meeting with Bill Mechanic, the CEO of 20th Century Fox, I knew he had also worked at Disney during the 1980s and early 90s, so I asked him then, "So you had meetings about us?" "You mean Disney and us, meaning Gary, John, and me?" "Are you kidding?" he said. "We met daily about how to get rid of you, because you were on our turf." We had a good laugh about it. Don Bluth Studios had backers. A group of 7 investors, including Gary and me, called the Bluth Group, and they needed returns for their money. Gary, John, and I hired a publicist, Kim Joy, who had worked at Disney for several years. A live-action movie had movie star faces to build publicity around. With animation, however, that's not the case. So a publicist who knew how to promote animated films is a plus. In my first meeting with her as the public face of Don Bluth Productions, Kim came out swinging. People think you guys are crazy, that you're bound to fail. They say, "What else did you expect when you walked away from the biggest, most successful animation studio on the planet?" I sank back, filled with dreads. These weren't the encouraging words I was expecting. Then she smiled. "Don, I'm gonna make your I'm gonna make your name a household. I can't talk today. Don, I'm going to make your name a household word. And for that to happen, you need to listen to me and do whatever I tell you to do." I gulped. "Okay, you're the boss." I was eager to learn from a pro. One NIMH press conference held at the UCLA auditorium was especially instructional. As the limo that Kim and I were riding in pulled in the university's parking lot, I looked out the window and saw some students running along beside the car, shouting my name. I began to roll down the window, excited to shake hands and make new friends, but Kim batted my hand away from the handle and directed the driver to rush us to the back of the building. She scolded, "Don, you simply can't be available to anyone who wants to talk to you. We have to create a mystique." Kim hurried me through the rear entrance to the auditorium and down a hallway, me running just to keep up. When she halted at a door, I expected a dressing room and looked forward to sitting down to gather my thoughts before the Q&A. But when she opened the door, I saw a janitor's closet filled with mops, brooms, soaps, and solvents. Her gentle push propelled me into the dark space. "Stay in here," she said. "I'll come and get you when it's time." Then she closed the door, leaving me in the dark, listening to the click of her high heels fade away down the hallway. "Well, this is different," I said, afraid to budge for fear I'd spill bleach or something worse on my clothes. "It's building mystique," I reminded myself. 20 minutes later, just as I was getting lightheaded from solvent fumes, Kim opened the door. "Follow me." She shepherded me to the wings of the stage, and I heard, "And without further ado, Don Bluth." Kim whispered, "Be yourself, have fun, and when I say it's time to go, we leave." "Yes, ma'am," I said meekly. Squelching my jitters, I walked onto the stage and up to the podium. The roar of the applause made me tongue-tied. At a loss, I glanced over at Tim standing in the wings, and she gave me a thumbs up. I took a breath and looked out into the blur of expectant faces. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. "Right, first question," I said. One guy stood and asked a doozy. "Why did you leave Disney?" Exactly what I had asked Judge Whittaker years ago on the BYU campus. Exactly what I asked him. Okay. The journalist leapt forward with pencils perched on their paths to catch my pearls of wisdom. I didn't want to dwell on negativity and blame, but I didn't want to lie. "Well, I left Disney because Walt left Disney," and the audience cheered. The truth speaks volumes. The rest of the Q&A was a blur, and at the end of the event, I practically ran from the spotlight into the aisles to greet and thank everyone. I was happily talking with a group of students and journalists when Kim appeared at my side and interrupted smoothly. "Oh, we would love to stay, but Mr. Bluth has another appointment this evening. Forgive me, but we must go." She hustled me back out the door, right to our limo. As we pulled away, I looked back at the students watching their hero zoom off into the night. "You did well," she said. "Thank you," I whispered. I got what she was doing. Don Bluth Productions was more than just Don Bluth, the farm boy. I felt excited and terrified, like I caught a tiger by the tail, a big, powerful beast that might turn on me in an instant. Publicity stunt. Without United Artists' backing, we knew we'd be desperate for PR opportunities. Aurora agreed to step in, with an event more than a year before the movie's release. Beggars can't be choosers, I thought, so I declared, "We'll take it." On March 30th, 1981, Aurora financed a huge celebration in the parking lot of the Swiss Chalet on Ventura Boulevard, and invited every journalist in the city to attend. Gary, John, and I waited by tables when the ice figurines of fairies and elves, carved out of butter, threatened to melt in the hot March LA sun. The first of the press arrived in their buses, and we welcomed them to the party and passed out press kits. Jerry Goldsmith's music from the music waved through the speakers. Among the excited chatter were words that made me want to sing. Secret of NIMH will be the perfect story. Don Bluth Productions versus Disney. It's like David versus Goliath. But the universe had another idea in mind for that day. The journalists were still stepping off the bus when a squawk from the loudspeakers broke the spell of the music. A stern newscaster's voice silenced everyone. Special bulletin at 2:27 this afternoon. As President Reagan and the First Lady were leaving the Washington Lincoln Hotel, the President was shot and wounded. The shooter, John Hinckley Jr., is now in custody, and the President has been taken to the George Washington University Hospital. We will keep you updated as we get more information. Oh, shit. So, yeah, for those who don't know, in 1981, Reagan was shot, and President Reagan there was an assassination attempt on him. Like, there's actually footage of him getting shot, kind of the same way Kennedy was shot. It's the reason why the president's not really allowed to just, like... It's a reason why the president's truck is now, like, bulletproof all the time and stuff, and why he's not really allowed to walk in public as much as he normally is, as he used to be. The next sound was the revving of the bus's engines. Like a flock of birds, the press turned around and reboarded the buses to cover this historic moment. When the last of the buses pulled out of Ventura Boulevard, it was just studio animators and staff among the banquet tables of food. I piled food on a plate and sat down to eat. Nim would have to wait. It would eventually find its audience. Meanwhile, my thoughts were with the president. Jonah and the Whale. Steven Spielberg's E.T., the summer blockbuster in 1982 blew Disney's Tron and our NIMH well out of the water. I bet Disney suits stewing in their own misery were laughing their heads off at ours. Disney was big enough to handle low box office receipts. They had a steady stream of income and investors in their projects. A little guy like Don Bluth Productions didn't stand a chance. Would we have to fold with only one movie under our belt? I took our unfortunate circumstances as a sign that I was not in good standing with the man upstairs. We're blessed by the right decisions we make, and we're cursed by the wrong ones. The inexcusable fact was this. I'd broken a promise that I'd made. I sat in the parking lot of the Swiss Gillette. I know what I need to do. I groaned to the man in the rearview mirror, but I don't want to do it. Yeah, he said. Not that I think Disney will take you back. I'm not thinking about going back to Disney, I snapped. I walked resoundingly into the lobby and called Gary and John to my office. Toss me overboard, I told them glumly. I'm the Jonah on the ship. Fling me into the briny sea and things will get better. What are you talking about? Asked Gary. Yeah, who's Jonah? Asked John. I've been hearing this story since I was a child. In the Bible, Jonah was commanded by God to call the people of Nineveh to repentance. However, he refused his divine mission and fled on a ship. When a gigantic storm threatened the ship, Jonah confessed to the crew that he was hiding from God, and they threw him overboard. The storm abided, but Jonah was swallowed by a whale, who swam back to Nineveh and spit Jonah out onto the shore to accomplish God's command. Gary shook his head, still confused. John offered him the moral of the story. Jonah thought he could hide from God, and so God prepared a great fish to swallow him up. Don here thinks he's the Jonah on our little ship. Oh? Gary folded his arms and looked me up and down. Okay, Don, what have you done? For 3 years, I haven't paid my tithing, I admitted. That's the reason we're in trouble. I grabbed a Bible from my desk to flick across the pages. I found the passage I wanted and slid the Bible across the table to them. Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10. Gary read the passage aloud. Bring ye all your tithes to the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, say the Lord of hosts. If I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, then there shall not be room enough to receive it. I don't follow, confessed John. Me neither, said Gary. Because I haven't paid my tithing, the windows of heaven must have been shut. We're never going to get out of this mess unless... I sighed and stood up. Where are you going, Don? I asked John. To the bank. I've got $12,000 in my savings account. I'll withdraw all of it and pay off the back ties. That hopefully will get the windows opened. The next day I handed the check to my bishop, and within a week I received a check in the mail from the Writers Guild for exactly $3,000, which I used to give the studio a few more weeks of payroll. Now I wasn't even a member of the Writers Guild, and how did the Writers Guild check that? Now I wasn't even a member of the Writers Guild, and how did the Writers Guild check just happen to be the same amount as the tithing? I decided not to question it. Oh, I read it wrong. It was $12,000. I read it as 3,000, not 12,000. I was like, wait, why is it? I was like, wait, he gave up 12 and only got 3 back, but no, he got exactly 12,000 back. I decided not to question it. That check kept Don Bluth Productions from going under. And get this, 1 year later, the Writers Guild sent me a letter in which they wrote that they had mistakenly sent me a check for $12,000, and would I please send the money back? Of course I did, and I have never missed tithing again ever since. Grow an even thicker skin. At an animation awards banquet, I bumped into my one-time mentor, Frank Thomas. I grinned, happy to see him, and he invited me to sit with him for a moment at his table. I really don't know what I expected him to say about NIMH. Maybe a bit of encouragement, or pride that he was one of my mentors, but he just looked at me and grinned back. Finally, I broke the silence. Well, what did you think of it? I asked. He didn't need to ask what it meant. With all the money you were given, why didn't you make a good movie? Damn. Frank didn't like Secret of NIMH. Damn. Frank's remark hit me below the belt, but in that moment, I heard Willie's voice again saying, to survive, you'll need to grow a thick skin. I reached for my most forgiving spirit. We certainly gave it our best, I replied warmly. One thing is for sure, I can now appreciate what your team of animators went through during your career. Willie also said, if you're the director, say goodbye to your friends. And with that, I think we're going to call it there. I think those chapters were quite long, actually. But yeah, I'm ready to call it here. The next chapter will be chapter 17. But yeah, I'm done for the day. Oh man. Oh, so definitely really interesting to see just how things began to fall apart. How Don continued to doubt himself and why he never believed that he should have been a director. He just wanted to animate, but at the same time, he felt like he had to step up. Not because he believed he was capable of being a director, but because he knew Disney was not being what Disney was capable of. It wasn't meeting up with the standard that Disney had themselves lived up to or made themselves. So basically, in these 4 chapters we read today, we covered Don finally returning to Disney full time, working on Robin Hood and Rescuers Down and the Rescuers and such, getting in fights with Willie Reitherman and Ron, what his name was. Eventually he left. He made Banjo the Woodpile Cat, and he made Secret of NIMH and released it. But yeah, definitely we're getting into the nitty-gritty stuff finally. Now we're actually getting into the real nitty-gritty stuff that I wanted to learn more about. The stuff with his experience with Disney and animation in general, which I really wanted to see more of. And I guess next week and next Sunday, we'll get to read about his collaboration with Steven Spielberg, which I'm really looking forward to. Maybe we'll even get to talk about Land for Time. Maybe we'll hear him talk about Spike finally. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I'm going to call it here. So I was thinking about making a video on Guardians of the Galaxy 3, but I did see it a few days ago. I really loved it, but I need to get to work on this next video, and it's a long one, so I don't think I'm going to have the time to make a Guardians of the Galaxy 3 video, sadly. It's not going to happen. I just don't have the time. This next video is a long one. It's looking like it might be close to an hour long, and I do have a sponsor for it, and they want me to get the video out soon, so I do kind of need to get to work on it. So yeah, that's gonna happen. I actually showed you a little sneak peek of it last night on Twitter. It's the Race to the Edge video that people have been demanding for almost a year now. So yeah. With that being said, I need to get to work on it. Hopefully, I'll have it done later this by next weekend. Hopefully, it's like like I said, I'm gonna be spending all my time on it. So hopefully, I'll have it done by this weekend. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for standing by. I can't wait to see you next week so we can read more. I will see you guys in the next video. So stay awesome. Rock on.